Hi, my name is Oliver, and in this video I'll teach you how to create a 3D particle explosion in After Effects, so let's jump right into it. To get started, we need a 3D model, and as I quite honestly lack modeling skills, I've grabbed one from today's sponsor, Yellow Images. Yellow Images is a huge marketplace of design assets to make your process much faster. They offer more than 40,000 high-quality premium mockups, 360 images, creative fonts, and a store full of amazing graphic assets such as illustrations, textures, presets, and more. Yellow Images has great subscription plans, or you can pay individually for any item as well. I've made sure to give you an extra discount, so Yellow Images has hooked me up with 100 discount codes for 20% off, but it's first come, first serve. Get your 20% off with the code Oliver20, links in the description. So one of the most annoying things when working with 3D models is that you most often need some sort of renderer. It's very slow and takes a lot of processing power, and also you need to get perfect lighting and you have to set that all up in order for it to work. And sometimes you just have a very tight deadline and you just need to create this quickly, but the 3D objects of course still have to look great. So I found a perfect alternative for this and a great way to implement 3D into your work without having the hassle of modeling or rendering and everything like that. So I'm currently on Yellow Images 360 images page, and as you can see, we have a load of different models here. Now to explain how this works, we can go into one of the models. Here we have a royal crown, and if we go down here, you can see that we can click and drag to rotate it, so we can actually rotate it in 3D space. And you can rotate it up and down, and you can get all of the different angles that you want. And essentially, this could be used if you needed to composite this into an image and you needed a certain angle. But the smart thing about this when it comes to animating is that this is all PNG images, which means that you can take a certain angle and download all of the images for that full rotation, so that's around 15 to 16 images. So when you sequence this in After Effects, you get that 3D rotation without having the hassle of going through 3D models, renderers, and everything like that. So because we're working with a particle explosion, I found it very fitting to use a grenade for this. So I've taken this grenade from the 360 library, then I've downloaded the 15 images needed for full rotation, and as you can see, when we sequence these, we get that animation. So when we get into After Effects, we double click the project tab, then we find all of the images, just click one of them and select PNG sequence. So when we open this up, we have the sequence, and now we just need to adjust some settings. Then you right click the sequence, go to interpret footage, main. Here we want to change the frame rate, so we want to change it to 12 frames a second, just because we don't have that many frames for the rotation. And then all the way down here, if you're able to see it, we just want to loop it maybe 15 times, just so we make sure that we have enough to work with. So press enter, then we drag it into our composition, and here you can see it's quite large, but before we do anything, we actually want to right click and pre-compose it, and we'll just call this the grenade. So now we can scale it down, and as you can see, I just have this very simple background. It's just a gradient ramp effect set to radial ramp. Then we have the lighter yellow towards the center, and it becomes darker towards the edges. So we sort of want to use this as our sprite. We want it to start from the center, explode outwards, and sort of slow down. So imagine that when the explosion is happening, it sort of gets out to a certain point, and then it becomes slow motion and just sort of floats through space. So to do that, we'll select the grenade. We'll open up the scale by pressing S, then holding down Shift and R for the rotation, as well as P for the position. Now, because of the way we're going to ease this, we actually want to separate the position. So right click and separate dimensions. And we just want to add a keyframe to every single thing. Right here at the start, we want it to be 0 at the scale. And then we can go, let's say 10 frames ahead. Then we want it to scale up quite a bit. So right around here. We also want it to move outwards to one side. So just move it out a bit. And we perhaps also want it to be rotated. Then at the start here, we of course want it to be rotated a bit more towards the left. So we have a bit more rotation. And as you can see, when we just scrub through that, you have this sort of grenade going outwards, and you can just adjust that rotation as much as you'd like. So as you can see, that should be fine. And now we just want it to continue in this motion, just move outwards, scale up a bit more and rotate a bit more. Let's go to the end of the composition. Then we drag it out to follow that same motion path right around here. We we want it to rotate a bit more, and we want it to scale up a bit more. So it could be something like this, and now we just need to ease it. So select every single keyframe, press F9 to apply easy ease, and then go into the graph editor. So let's start with the rotation. You can see that I have selected the value graph down here, and that's just so we can see the value change over time. So we want the value to change fast at the start and then deaccelerate. Then we want this last part to be linear, so it's just sort of floating with constant speed. So right around here. And then we want this handle to sort of go into the next handle, so you have a smooth transition here. So that could be something like this. That way you can see we have quite a smooth motion graph, and it should rotate rather quickly at the start, deaccelerate, and then go into this constant speed. So now we actually want to repeat this motion path for both the scale and the position. So now you can see I've repeated the motion path for every single one of them. And the only difference really is on the scale, and I just have added a little bit of easing to the start. And that's just because if I were to do this very steep curve, you could see that it would scale up way too quickly, and we just want it to scale up a little bit slower towards the start. So as you can see, it pops out rather quickly and then floats at a constant speed. The next part of this is adding multiple different grenade particles in different sizes, rotations, scales, and everything like that. Now you could go ahead and do this manually and just duplicate it and change everything one by one. But this is very time consuming, especially if you want to create somewhere between 20 to 30 of these particles. So I'm going to quickly walk through how you can rig this up. So you can actually just duplicate the composition, and then you have a control layer where you can change the scale, rotation, everything like that. So it doesn't have to be that hard. Now there's a bit of expressions involved with this, but don't get terrified. I'll walk you through every single part of it so you understand how you can create this on your own. So the first thing we're going to do is create an exact copy of this particle, but just rotating in the other direction. So we'll go to the project tab. Here we have the grenade composition. We'll press Command and Control D to duplicate it. We'll drag that into the composition. And as you can see, it's scaled up quite large. And also this is because the 360 images are such a high quality. So even though we're working in a 2K composition, they still exceed that. So what we're going to do is select the other layer and press U to see our keyframes. Then we can just copy them and paste them onto the other layer. So that way we have the exact same animation. Then we double click that grenade duplicate comp, select the PNG sequence, and right click. Then we go to time and time reverse layer. So that way you can just see it's rotating towards the left instead of the right. Now we can also rename this composition by going to composition, composition settings, and just calling this the grenade reverse. So go back into the main comp, and we now have these two different variations, and we want a control layer. So we'll go to layer, new, null object. Here we'll just call this the control layer. We'll go to the effects and presets and search for the checkbox control. So drag that onto the layer, and we can just call this the reverse. So now we want to link up both of these compositions. So when we have ticked the reverse checkbox, it will only show the reverse animation, and when it's unticked, it will only show the regular grenade. So go to the grenade reverse, press T as an opacity, and Alt Option click to get the expression control up. Then we'll create an if-else statement, which basically just takes a look at the box, and if the box is ticked, then it will show the reverse grenade, and if it's not ticked, it will hide it. We'll type in if, make a parenthesis, then we will pick whip up to the checkbox on the control layer, and then we'll just say that if this checkbox is equals to 0, we will output the value of 0, and else we will output the value of 100. So I'm just placing these values into these curly brackets, then we'll click out of it. And as you can see right now, it's at 0% because the box is not ticked. But if we tick it, then it becomes 100%. So we just want to take this expression and copy it. Then go to the opacity of the regular grenade. Alt Option click the stopwatch and paste it. And here we just want to change the values. So we'll put it at 100, else 0. So we're just reversing them, which means that you can see if the box is not ticked, the regular grenade is being shown, and that is rotating towards the right. If the box is ticked, it's the reverse grenade being shown, and it's rotating towards the left. So the next part is rigging the internal rotation of the grenade, as well as the external rotation, so we can rotate it around that center point. So we'll take both of the grenades and parent them to the control layer. So you can see then it rotates around that null. But of course we want to counter this rotation, so the sort of grenade keeps that upright position. Now we need a slider control. So we'll search for slider control, drag that onto our control layer. Then we'll call this the internal rotation, duplicate it and call it the external rotation. Now to make this work, we should sort of think about how the rotations should interact with each other. So we'll go down to the grenade, we can just take the reverse, press R as in rotation, and we'll Alt or Option click the stopwatch to create an expression. We'll start out by just taking the value of this rotation because it's already animated and we don't want to ruin that. So pick whip to the rotation. Then we want to think about the internal rotation. So we want to add this internal rotation slider to the rotation that's already applied to the grenade. So we'll just type in plus, pick whip to the internal rotation. And then, because we have to counter the rotation of this control layer, we have to subtract that. So we type in minus, and then pick whip to the rotation up here. And as you can see, nothing really happens, but that's because both of these values are at 0. And also we have to link the rotation of this control layer to the external rotation. And that way, when we start to rotate the external rotation, you see it rotates around that null. And also it maintains the internal rotation. And if we want to adjust that, we can do it up here. So now we can right click and copy the expression of that rotation and paste it onto the grenade. So that way it works both on the reverse and the regular one. And now we can move on to the scale. So if you're enjoying the video so far, I really appreciate if you go down and leave a like and perhaps a comment. And you can also subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with the new content. So here we also have to Alt or Option click the scale. And because of the fact that the scale is in 2 dimensions, the X and Y scale, we have to work with variables. So we'll simply just type in S equals to, and then we can just use the S variable both for the X scale and the Y scale. And this is just something that you have to do. So as the scale is already animated, we also want to take this value and keep it as we did with the rotation. Now the way that we do this is a bit different, and we just want to target either the X scale or the Y scale. They're the exact same. So we'll just type in value, then square bracket, and we'll type in 0, which refers to the X scale. We could also type in 1, which just refers to the Y scale. And now you may be very inclined to just add the internal scale to this value, but you have to stop and think for a second. Because if you add the value, then at this very start, when the scale should actually be at 0, then all of a sudden maybe you have added 20 in the slider and the scale will start at 20. Or maybe you have it at minus 20 and the scale will be at minus 20. So this doesn't work. We want to multiply it, and that way it will always look at this value and go from that. So if you're at 0, no matter what you multiply it with, it will stay at 0. And that way we make sure that it always scales from 0. So we'll just multiply it and then by the internal scale. And just to make it easier to work with, we'll divide it by 100, and that way it's just easier to sort of adjust the slider value. Then we'll press enter, and here we'll make a square bracket, and we'll just tell the scale which values to use. So for the X scale, we'll use the S variable, and for the Y scale, we'll use the S variable, and then just end it with a semicolon. Now you can see that the grenade actually disappears, but that's because we just have to set the internal scale at 100, and then you get the exact same scale. So now to sort of prove my point, we can scale this up, but when we go to the very start, it's still at 0 in scale. Now if we change this to a plus, you can see that it actually has that extra scale at the start, which we don't want. So we'll just undo that. Now we also want to take the scale of the control layer, Alt Option click, and just link that to the external scale. Now we of course also want that to be at 100, so they both start at 100. And if we go a bit ahead, you can see that we can increase the internal scale, so the scale within the object, and then the external scale if we want it to be out even further. And you can just use these to sort of counter each other and get the perfect position of the grenade. Then we simply just copy that scale expression from the reverse grenade and paste it onto the regular grenade. So now we can take a look at offsetting this 3D rotation, and we also do that with a slider. So we select the layers, right click and go to time, enable time remapping, and here we just Alt Option click the first time remap, and now we can type in the expression. So we just keep the time remap, then we type in dot value at time. So with this expression, you take time, then you add or subtract a value. So you want to add a value in this case, then we go and pick whip to the time offset. So we're adding this amount to the time, and then we'll just divide it by 12 and end the parenthesis. And the reason why we divide with 12 is because the composition is 12 frames a second. So this way, when we go out of it, you can see that if I change this by 1, it just goes 1 frame ahead. And that way it's quite easy to control this and adjust how much you want it to be offset. So we just right click the time remap, copy the expression and paste it onto the other layer. And now, well, we have the full control. So let's take a look at everything we have done so far. We have the grenade popping out, and then if you want to adjust it, we can reverse it so it rotates in the other direction. Then we can change the internal rotation a bit, perhaps the external rotation if we want it to pop out from the other side. Adjust that accordingly. Then we perhaps want it to be a bit smaller, but we want it to be further out. We can do that. And then we want it to be offset a bit in time. And mostly this is just used to differentiate the different grenade particles from each other. But that way you can just see that very quickly we have created an animation that is a bit different. And we can go ahead and do this multiple times to create all of the particles. So before we do that, we want to select these 3 layers, right click and pre-compose. And we can just call this the grenade pre-comp and click OK. So before we start going crazy and duplicating this grenade pre-comp, we just want to do a bit of compositing on the grenade, and that way it just sort of blends more in with the scene. Right now the highlights are all white, but we want them to be more yellow so it blends in with the background. And if we start doing that after we have created all of the duplicates, then it just takes a lot of time. So we'll open up the grenade pre-comp, go into one of the grenades, and here with the PNG sequence selected, we'll go to layer, layer styles, and we'll just select the inner glow. So we can zoom in a bit so you can see what's actually going on here. And we simply just want to select sort of a yellow tinted color, sort of like this. And right now you can see it's set to screen. We want that to be at overlay. And then we can adjust the size. So just ramp it up quite a bit, as you can see right here. And you may have to adjust the opacity and the color itself. Maybe you want a bit more of an orange tint. And really you just have to play a bit around with the settings here so you get a result that you like. But you can see that already it looks like the reflections are a bit more yellow. So then you can just copy that layer style, then go into the reverse grenade and paste it onto that as well. Then we go into the main composition and you can see it already blends a lot better in with the background, and it seems more as if it's part of the scene. So now to create multiple duplicates of this, we actually want to go up to the project tab, select the grenade pre-comp and press Command and Control D. That way you actually create a copy of the composition rather than just working with the same composition down here in the timeline. So we drag this in. And now you can go crazy and you just have to adjust the particles as much as you'd like, create as many duplicates as you'd like, and you really just have to keep it random and make sure to get some different sizes, some different rotations and everything like that, because particles really tend to be random. So now when you have a few grenades and you maybe find a hard time figuring out where to place them, you can use a little trick. You can go to Layer, New, Null Object. Then you take these grenades within the comp and duplicate them, just parent them to the null object. Then we go to scale, set the X scale to -100. Then we lock the constraint proportions again, scale them up quite a bit, and that way you just get a lot more variation and you can very quickly start to fill out the screen with these grenades. So now I've tweaked these grenades quite a bit and place them where I want them to be. And the next thing I've done to really sell the effect that they're composited on top of this background is to add some blur. So I've basically just used the Gaussian blur. You can either use the legacy one or just the regular one, it doesn't really matter. And I've just blurred out the grenades that are the closest to the camera and those that are the furthest away. So this is just an approximation and just really to create some depth. And with some of them, I've even animated it, so they start out at 0 in blurriness, and then they just become blurrier as they move even further out. So within the main composition, I have just added a grenade that sort of scales up and then down, and that's just to sort of anticipate the explosion that we see here next. So what I've done here within the scale is essentially, this is just the value graph. I've just made it scale up rather quickly, so it goes up, and then I've made sure that it doesn't stop completely at any point of time. So it gets this sort of elastic motion, and you can see it's also as if it's being dragged backwards instead of just stopping and then moving back. So this is just something that works quite great in this example. And then we just see all of the grenades exploding outwards. But now we really want to tie everything together, and we want to add an adjustment layer with a few adjustments to the colors and curves and everything like that. So we'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. We'll just call this the Adjustments. And we'll start out with the curves effect. So find that over here and drag that onto our effects control. So I just want to increase the highlights a tiny bit, maybe decrease the shadows a little bit, and then mess a bit around with the black point. So we get this very cool effect, as you can see, where the blacks are sort of less defined. So maybe around here. Then I want to go into the red channel. So maybe I'll just add a point down here and add a tiny bit to the highlights, as so. And really you can just tweak this as much as you like. So you can see this is a before and after. It just makes it pop a bit more. So that's the curves effect. Then I want to add a bit of grain, because I really feel like this lower frame rate, it works particularly well with grain for some reason. It just ties it together a lot more. It's not that clean, it's kind of rough, which also goes well with grain. So we'll go add grain, set it to the final output, and here we just have to zoom in a bit so we can see what we're doing. I just want to increase the size a bit, so maybe 1.2, decrease the intensity to 0.8. And as you can see, this is before and after. It just adds a bit of grittiness. And I want to take the animation and set that to 0. I don't want the grain to be animated. Then I actually also want to copy this grain and paste it onto the background. So we just get a bit more grain on that gradient, maybe increase it to 1 even. And now as a final effect on the adjustments, I like to add a optics compensation. And when I increase this, you can see it sort of moves inwards, but we just want to reverse it. And you can just see that it becomes a bit distorted towards the edges. And I just really like the feel of this effect on this particular project. So maybe around 40 to 50, whatever looks the best. And now I want to add a vignette, so we really focus on the center. So I'll go to Layer, New, Solid, call this the vignette. And instead of just doing the black one, I'll do it a bit more interestingly and choose a bit of an orange. So that's a darker color than the yellow we're using here. Click OK. Just place it under the adjustments. Then we go up here, click and hold and select the ellipse tool. Double click, so we get a mask, and we can just subtract that. And now this doesn't look that great, but that's because we have to feather it quite a bit. So just feather this mask out like so. And now something I like to do is go to the mode, and if you don't see that, just toggle switches/modes, and we'll just find the multiply. So this just adds a cool effect to it, and we'll press T and just turn this down a bit. So maybe around 30, 40, 50%. Really just play around with this, and you can see that already it looks like this is more of a scene just than some random particles. And just to quickly take a look at the before and after, this is the before and this is the after. So that's just some color correction and a bit more of compositing. Now we'll take a look at creating the shockwave. So right as the first grenade hits here, we want a shockwave because we have this sort of explosion. Now we want to make it 2D, so we really combine the 2D with the 3D and get this cool effect. So we'll go up to the ellipse tool, then we will go down here and select the title and action save. And here we roughly have to find the center. So that's around here. Click and hold down Command or Control and Shift to get that perfect circle. And we'll just drag it all the way up so it covers the entire thing. Then we'll select the pan behind tool and hold down Command and Control just to make sure that that anchor point is snapped to the center. So we'll call this the circle and disable the stroke and perhaps do this same orange color. And we get to the point right here when the explosion is about to happen. Press S in scale, add a keyframe and drag that out a bit. Then we set it to 0. Select the keyframes, press F9 to ease it and go into the graph editor. Here we have the value graph. And we simply just want it to happen quickly at the start and then deaccelerate quite a lot. So as you can see, we just have this sort of circle explosion, and you can adjust the timing if you'd like. Perhaps we want it to scale up even a bit more towards the end, but that's just sort of the main idea. Like this. Then we trim it down so we only have that part to work with. We press Command Control D to duplicate it. Just drag it one frame to the right. And then for the track matte, we select the alpha inverted matte. And as you can see, it actually becomes this circular shockwave. So now that we have created this, we can apply a bit of turbulent displace just to displace it a bit. So search for the turbulent displace here. Drag that onto one of the layers. So we want quite a bit of size and the amount shouldn't be that much. We just copy and paste that to the other layer. And now it's quite hard to see, but we'll just pre-compose the layer. Call this the shockwave. Place it underneath all of the grenades, like so. And here we'll also use the multiply. So it becomes quite dark. Maybe we want it down at 20% or so, perhaps 30. Then we can just duplicate this, move it one frame to the right. Try to play a bit around with the opacity. So for one of them, we want it to be a bit lower. For the other one, a bit higher. So we can see both of them. And now we can play it back. And you can just see we get that cool shockwave effect behind the grenades. And that just adds a bit of oomph to that sort of explosion. So what is an animation without text? For the final part, we want to add a bit of text. And I've just written Nate. You can see I have it as a text layer here. I've also placed a grenade on top, so we get a bit of depth. When we have sort of a 2D element and we place something on top, that really shows some depth and dimensionality. So that's great. See if I select the text layer, go up to Window and find the Character tab. Just drag it up here. I'm using the Gotham Ultra font. And to animate this, I was just thinking of animating the scale and tracking. So the tracking essentially decides how much distance there is between each and every letter. So I want it to be very cramped together at the start and then sort of explode out. So the way we do this is open up the layer, go to Animate, and then we just find the tracking option. So we will make it start where it's cramped all the way in the center, right around here, and add a keyframe. Then we'll go a few frames ahead, like so. Just make it go to 0. And then at the end of the composition, we just want it to be a bit further out. So we keep that constant speed as well as the grenades when they're moving outwards. So now we want to add some scale. Go to the very start, press S in scale, then just Shift U so we can see the tracking keyframes. And here we want it to be at 100. At the very start, we just want it to be at 0. And at the end, we just want it to be scaled up a bit further. So now we press F9 on the keyframes to ease them. And simply we just want to recreate the same easing as we did for the grenades. And now that we have done that, we end up with the final animation. You can see that the text is also scaling outwards. And we have the tracking. And it just has that same exploding effect as the grenades do. That's really all for this tutorial, and I hope that you learned something new about adding 3D to 2D backgrounds, compositing, some particle explosion, and everything like that. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like. Also go down in the description and use the promo code Oliver20 to get 20% off with your purchase on Yellow Images. I've also listed a few tutorials here that you may find useful. You can also subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications to get notified when I upload future videos. That's all for now. Till next time.